Hello everybody, welcome to this episode of Infection Control Matters. It's Martin Kiernan here, and something a little bit different this week. A few years ago, Brett, Phil and I met while we were all in Melbourne at the same time. It was just post-COVID, and we hadn't seen each other for a few years. We had a bit of a chat about whether we felt that we were actually experts or not. The problem was I completely messed up the recordings, and so it was almost unintelligible. But thanks to Adobe AI, I've managed to remaster the recording into something that you can actually listen to. So we thought we'd reissue it because it was actually quite popular. Well, it certainly promoted quite a lot of discussion amongst colleagues. Anyway, this is our take on Are We Experts?
Phil hasn't done an intro for a while.
Phil's not done an intro. Come on, Phil.
We are
what we're doing.
Welcome everybody, it's Phil Russo here, and I'm in the delightful position of having both Brett and Martin join us for this podcast, not live, in person. We are live, yes, in person, at a hotel in Melbourne. So welcome, Martin and Brett.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's one of your better introductions you've made.
It was, yeah. I might even have to edit that one. Well, I might have to. But it's nice to be face to face again, gentlemen, isn't it? After some time, say the least.
Very long time.
I'm guessing 3 years for you, Martin, that I've seen you. Yep. And Brett.
Yeah.
When was the last
This trip, yeah.
That was about a year ago, I think, in Sydney.
2.5, I suppose, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think you said you'd see me before you'd see.
Yeah, at one point I think I saw you before Phil. So
Anyway, we're reminiscing.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've only drunk one sip of our beer so far because we're in a bar, which is always a good place for a discussion. And we thought we'd have a little chat and various things you could talk about, what we've been up to for the last 3 years, but then everyone will be asleep. So some topic of discussion of the roadshows, the Asipsi roadshows we've been on this week, has been about experts in how we are experts. So we thought we'd mull over, are we experts? So, good for you, Greg. Are you an expert?
Well, that's a simple answer. I think no. I think that the more and more as time goes on, the more uncomfortable I am with the concept of being called an expert. And part of that's probably the more I know, the more I realise how much I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think the term gets used a bit loosely and flippantly, and people could call themselves an expert perhaps after doing a short course or being in a job for 3 months or reading something on Twitter. And so I think that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Phil, your view?
Well, I'd like to be an expert in Test cricket, but that's not going to happen. And
you don't see enough good at Test cricket.
Well, it's changing. And if you're a Melburnian like I am, that you know that everybody's an expert in epidemiology with our lockdowns, and everybody's an expert on mask wearing and hand hygiene. So I agree. I think I'm certainly not an expert, and I think the term expert to me brings with it connotations of somebody who doesn't change their mind with the science. And I think I don't want to be labelled like that. And I think what we should be thinking about is how expert we are with our thinking about things and how we approach things rather than being an expert on a topic. Because my observations over the past couple of years have been the experts have often been wrong, as have I. And we need to, and I certainly don't consider myself an expert, not in infection prevention and control.
I mean, I think we have expertise, but Peter Ann Zimmerman made a great comment yesterday. I hadn't heard before that you can be in infection prevention or in any specialty for 20 years, but if you repeat the same year 20 times, you actually don't progress very much. And you do have to continue learning. I can't remember who she said that.
Yeah, she said Deb Macbeth.
Okay.
I think it was Deb Macbeth.
I mean, I really like that one because in this game, if you're not learning stuff, I think the year I don't learn something is when I should be doing. I would consider myself to be dangerous, and I should get out, and because there's always something new. But I also come from an era where there was one infection prevention nurse or infection control nurse, as we were called, in an organisation, and you did a course, and suddenly you became the expert. and you had to know about everything. And we would go and visit the laundry, and we would look at ventilation. But I'm not sure how a deep an understanding we got. I think we got enough to get through. But I think the last couple of years has shown us that actually there's people far more expert in these specific fields. And I now am sort of starting to think of myself as, instead of being, in a hospital, if I go back to medical training when I was a lad, as it were, you have a general surgeon who does anything with a knife. And Professor David Leeper, who I've done work with in the UK's written surgical site infection guidelines, tells me tales of when he was a junior registrar. If he was on call for his hospital, he would do everything from deliver babies, fix fractures, repair people's guts. It was the surgeon, and they were very general. And general medicine was the thing when I trained as well. And now you come into a hospital and there's renal medicine and there's cardiac medicine and there's endocrinology, and the specialism is really there. To the extent you have orthopedic surgeons who specialise in one joint. Now, we are generalists, I think, and so I'm almost thinking myself as a sort of a GP now. I have a broad understanding of a lot of principles, but actually I need to know who to go to get the really specialist expertise to fix a specific problem. So if I've got air handling problems, I'm going to go to somebody who's got ventilation experience, and maybe an engineer. I've listened to a lot of people from engineering backgrounds over the pandemic, and I'd be accessing them, and instead of thinking, hey, I know everything about that. Clearly I don't.
Yeah, look, a GP is a good analogy because, they're sort of the coordinator. First person you go to, person who tries to coordinate your care, hopefully, and put the puzzle together, do what they can do in a range of different areas and do that really well, aren't you? And I reckon that's a pretty good analogy for an upset. Now, that said, there are, in our field of infection prevention and control, there are people who I would say are experts within their field of infection prevention and control. So there'll be people who have gone into, have a really in-depth understanding of reprocessing, for example, or
Cleaning.
or sterilisation, or intravascular device management, or whatever it might be, surveillance, or. So I think, in that instance, you could say, I'm an infection control person with a real expertise in this area, and I guess that's probably where I see myself more as someone who's, worked in a whole range of different settings and areas. Haven't done, that for a while, but yes, I have in recent times. It's COVID, but there's a real interest in passion and a better understanding in certain areas than others. And I'll be the first one to be put my hand up. When Phil and I were working in CQV, one great gig, Hotel Quarantine Victoria. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
One of the things that we were able to access there, because, and we're in a really privileged position to probably get most things that we actually wanted and asked for, was we could pull in that expertise, even if that meant more money. It was going to cost more money because we needed experts in ventilation, in engineering, and at work we needed an expert in education, really, in our infection control team. And Phil's in education, I'm in education. We've taught. We do postgrad, do undergrad education. Not too bad in education, understand the principles of it, but really needed someone who could design and put together something for a boutique, bespoke type workforce. And that's a different skill set. We got the content and we got some skills in that, but someone to deliver it. So we were lucky in that sense. But I think that's one thing that probably helped us in that role, was sort of being surrounded by people we could call upon.
That's true. And probably most people who work in the healthcare setting don't have the resources available that we had at our fingertips. So I like the idea of a generalist infection prevention or infection. So you call yourself a GIP then, Martin, in that sense.
You're not putting that.
But don't you have different levels of being a GIP? So we're just saying trainee GIP, a registrar.
Maybe we'll get away from the GIP thing. No, I mean, actually, it's sort of, we do that now within banding. Certainly in the NHS, you join as a band 5 or band 6 infection prevention nurse and then work your way up. But often that goes on experience and not necessarily specific skills in a specific area.
Yeah.
And sometimes I need to change people's behaviour. Well, and I've read lots of papers about behaviour, but I'm not a behaviour specialist, and maybe I would maybe want to access somebody with behavioural change experience. And they may work in a different department, but actually there's plenty of areas within a hospital that need to change behaviour, in various different interventions that are not related to infection prevention. So why are there no hospital behaviouralists who could be a specialist that we could draw on? I've never heard of that sort of role.
No, well, I think there's a real need for behavioural science incorporated into healthcare generally. Not just infection prevention. A lot of things that people do in problems of facing healthcare are about individual choices people make, the motivation that they have, and all that's about behaviour. And I think, cool.
Well, and that leads into implementation science too. So I think there's a lot of work going on, and that's really relevant for a lot of infection control prevention because the interventions require behavioural changes, and so you need, if it works in one setting, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate and work in another setting. So you need to understand the content and the settings, the environment that you're putting the intervention into, and devise an implementation plan that's appropriate for that setting.
Now, on this concept of being generalist and infection control professionals broadly as a profession, standards, right? So, I think we're in need of practice standards that sort of would help guide that along its path, so that there's a better pathway for people who come into this area, understanding where that might fit and where they need to develop, where they can grow. And perhaps that could then be used to help the employment side, where we're trying to think about who's the best person for different jobs that actually matches up. We're not expecting Joe Bloggs, who was tissue viability nurse one week, to be infection control expert the next.
Well, that's described my career. Oh, that's it.
Yes,
Yeah. It's the blogs. Yeah, okay.
But I think if there's one lesson, I mean, there's millions of lessons we can take away, but if there's one, I think, for infection prevention teams, is that they need to consult with other experts. They need to have the occupational hygienists, they need to have the behavioural people, they need to have the ventilation engineers. They need to be able to consult with all those groups, and that's where I like this idea of being the generalist. So you get confronted with a problem and an issue, and you are the one who funnels that issue to the right area to get the correct advice. And traditionally, infection control teams have have been nurses.
Yeah.
We now need to open up that horizon and broaden their skill and expertise of each of the infection control teams.
I mean, we've got quite a few clinical scientists working now in infection prevention and control. They were working in micro labs, a number of them, and their focus has changed, partly because micro's changed, but also actually they developed an interest in it, IPC, and there's some really excellent ones actually leading infection prevention teams in the UK, including being the infection control doctor. And they bring a different expertise and a different set of thought processes. So I think the two marry together extremely well. But, constantly consulting other people, do you think people could think, actually, they don't know what they're doing? They're not the expert that we thought they were. He's having to talk to somebody else, or he's having to get a bit of advice from there.
Yeah.
Or do you think there's a fear of that, do you think?
From the infection preventionist point of view, there possibly is. And they don't, I think it's probably reasonable to say that historically there's been a bit of a turf war. This is my area. This is what I know best, and you should listen to me. But, it hasn't worked. No. And, we say it, but I don't know if we always walk the talk, but infection prevention is everybody's business. And, we need to get over it ourselves and understand that sometimes other people may have better knowledge of certain situations than we do.
And it's okay to be wrong, because being a so-called expert is about being able to admit we're wrong. And sometimes you're not always wrong. You might be sometimes about blatantly wrong. But there are times we're wrong in the context of time. And what we thought 6 months ago was a certain thing may not be, because evidence base has changed. And we've got the ability to be able to roll with that. And I reckon there's a lot more credibility for people who change their views, because you're actually getting more going to them and saying, what do you think about this? And someone goes, well, I thought this last week, but actually the new evidence is this.
Yeah.
I almost rather that if I was going to someone, because they're not stuck in something of 30 years ago.
Actually, it's quite interesting, because often we're asking other people to change their practice. We see line infections are high, and we say, okay, maybe you need to think about doing this particular intervention. So we're asking them to change what they do, but sometimes we're potentially a bit reluctant to change what we do, even in in spite of evidence, because people don't like to see or be perceived to be indecisive or wrong. And that is sometimes when you put yourself in that position, telling people what to do all the time, rather than working with them, there's a potential about it. I think.
We do have a problem doing this podcast, though.
Go on.
We have a problem in that the Martin's looked down at his thing thinking we have a problem. It's not.
I know, the batteries are still running.
Yeah, batteries okay. Now, we have a problem because we haven't actually got one of the diverse opinion debales on this. We're all in agreement that perhaps we shouldn't be calling ourselves experts. That we haven't actually got someone who's here talking, say, actually, no, at the counter view. And it'd be interesting to see if people who are listening will have different views, and that's completely fine. And maybe we're barking up the wrong tree with this one. So.
Actually, well, there was a pro-con, 2 letters to the Journal of Hospital Infection not that long ago. One from Mike Weinbrenner and Teresa Inkster, who are heavily into the environment and water specialists, saying we should have subspecialisation in infection prevention. And one from Peter Wilson and Layla Hale at UCL, saying we shouldn't. We should not have subspecialisation. I have to say, I'm in the subspecialisation camp, because if you work in a big teaching hospital and you've got a decent sized team, you're going to have somebody who's going to be focusing on survivals. So they'll have expertise in that area. You may well have somebody who's focused on the environment. Leeds Teaching Hospitals used to have a chap called Gary Thurkel, who was employed by the Estates Department as an infection prevention person. So within the team, you are going to have a bit of that, but I think that it'd be nicer to make it a little bit more focused, and then you can get more specific and specialised training in that area. So if you're going to do ventilation, maybe you go off and do some ventilation courses or some water courses, so that you get a bit more of an understanding, so that when you're having those discussions with your ventilation engineer, you talk in the same language, because often you're not talking the same language, in which case barriers might come up and you might think he's telling me.
That's never happened before. What are you talking?
No.
So I think, we've also been, I wouldn't say a bit down about this topic, but I think the other thing that this has highlighted in having this chat is all the things we've talked about, what a diverse profession that it is. And that's probably why it's so exciting to be in it, enjoyable to be in it, because we've talked about all kinds of stuff from like quarantine to to ventilation to cleaning to vascular devices, sterilization, airports, childcare facilities,
community centres,
education. It just goes on and on.
But there's nothing actually that goes on within a healthcare provider organisation that you don't have an interest in some way. So therefore, how can you be an expert in all of it? You can't. I remember a guy called Jonathan Plum many years ago saying he realised how much of an expert he was perceived to be in his organisation when somebody rang him up to ask him how they could get rid of the parrot that had landed in the tree outside the hospital, because they were worried about psittacosis. So then he becomes a veterinary and bird expert as well.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of diversity of experience, which is a really good thing, because you have to, when you're balancing up risks, actually having that broad knowledge of everything is really good, because you're going to have to make decisions on the shades of grey that we've also been chatting about. Really, it's your favourite film on book. I understand that, but it's working out where the decision can be. But sometimes to make it that bit more dark grey to help you make the decision, or that bit paler grey, you might need to get that expert in.
Well, it's been an interesting chat, gents, and I think it's probably
time for another drink.
You've had this one, okay? And thanks everyone for listening to our little chin wag around it.
Indeed.
Really interesting, different views on it too.
Yeah.
Perspectives on that.
And maybe we'll reconvene about 11 o'clock tonight and safety discussions.
Yeah, that may not make the.
We'll see. We'll see. Good to see you both.
Yeah. And you too, guys.
And
Till the next time.
Till next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.